2. Diversity and educational challenges of minorities in multicultural school setting. Dearest learners, welcome again to the second unit of the module. I am sure you will find this unit equally essential and instructive for your teaching material and activity design and implementation. Therefore, topics included in this unit will be major forms of diversity, social construction, fidentity, social and cultural prejudices and stereotypes, and ethno-cetricism. Furthermore, you will be equipped with tools, strategies and techniques that can guide you in handling discrimination and talking racism and sexism and other related issues. Unit objectives. At the end of the unit, the student will be able to describe the different forms of diversity in societies, explain the concepts of stereotypes, prejudices, ethnocentrism, etc., analyze the educational problems faced by diverse social groups in a multicultural context, analyze the impacts of racism, sexism, classism, extremism and the like on educational situations of minorities, discuss strategies for combating racism, sexism and other problems in educational institutions. Major forms of diversity. Every child comes to school with an ethnic identity, whether these identifications are conscious or unconscious. This identification must be recognized and respected by the teacher. It must be the basis for the learning activities in the classroom. This recognition of individual ethnic identities is the beginning point. It is a connector of both the teacher to the student and the students to each other. It is the basic building block in the learning process, which requires knowing where the child is relative to him/herself and the content to be addressed. This ethnic identification is a continual point of focus throughout the education process and is the basis for developing the next level of identification, which is a national identification. We live in a world with an abundant array of diversity. Diversity is evident in people, the environment, and all forms of life. Advancements in technology have made the world seem smaller and increased the interaction between people from different cultures. The world's economy has become increasingly globalized, fueling the rapid expansion of immigration to industrialized countries over the last 60 years. Today, it is not unusual to find classrooms where 3 or 4 different languages and cultures are represented. In order to educate the future generations of our society effectively, the education system must be successful, teaching all children to communicate and interact with people from different backgrounds and with different abilities. In addition, if we are to maintain a country where social mobility and opportunity are viable possibilities, educators must find ways to offer an excellent education to all students regardless of their background. The purpose of this chapter is to discuss several issues related to educating children in a diverse society. Diversity is a fundamental aspect of our world and a defining characteristic of the field of special education. This chapter concerns the education of students from diverse cultural and linguistic backgrounds who may or may not have disabilities that require special education services. For culturally and linguistically diverse (CLD) students, issues of diversity, difference, and disability can be quite complex and challenging for classroom teachers. In order to better discuss these challenges, specific terms common in discussions of diversity require explanation. A learning style refers to the way people learn new information. It includes how information is processed and how study habits differ. For example, some students prefer sit in the front of the class and listen intently to everything the teacher is saying. Other students prefer it when teachers use graphs or visual representations of the material. The preferences are associated with which senses a learner uses when learning. Scholars have proposed that students use different perceptual strengths when learning. Kolb, 1984. As noted in table below, these strengths can be auditory, hearing, visual, or kinesthetic, active, in nature. Research on learning styles began to expand in the early 1970s. Today many models and various measures of learning styles exist. It is not clear whether one's learning style is flexible or fixed. However, many people are aware that they have preferences when it comes to the way they learn and study. Ethnicity, race and ethnicity are often used interchangeably, but they are different. Ethnicity is defined by group membership based on genealogy, national origin, and ancestry. Ethnicity does not change, even though characteristics of a specific ethnic group's culture may change. For example, in many instances, the label native ethnicity includes numerous tribal groups whose lifestyles vary extensively. Race is a term that attempts to categorize human beings into distinct groups according to phenotypes or physical traits, for example, skin color, eye shape. Throughout history, race has been used as a social, cultural, and biological construct to group people. Taylor and Whitaker, 2009. The concept of race has changed over time and continues to be difficult to define because our current knowledge of biological science does not support the idea that there are meaningful biological differences between races. Bird, 1996, considers that issues of ethnic diversity have important consequences for the design, content, delivery and assessment of programs and modules. But Mahmud and Eklund, 1998, suggest that of all developments by higher education institutions to improve the experience of Black and minority ethnic, BME, students, transformation of the curriculum remains the area of least achievement. This is often because of a lack of confidence among UK academics, a group that remains predominantly white, about how to incorporate ethnic diversity into their teaching. Gordon, 2007, reminds us that we all have an obligation to educate ourselves about the world around us, about developments in our field, and most especially about people, events and ideas about which our class, race and/or social position would normally insulate us from knowing, to avoid the situation where BME students may feel their interests are being marginalized. Gordon suggests that we do not just teach the contents of a discipline, but we teach what counts as worthy intellectual exploration by inclusion and by omission. Retention goes hand in hand with the widening participation agenda, and Tintu, 2003, notes that students are more likely to persist when they find themselves in settings that hold high expectations for their learning, provide needed academic and social support, and actively involve them with other students and faculty in learning. Van Dyke, 1998, also picks up on expectations, noting that if BME students believe that staff have low expectations of them, they will find this demotivating, and will be unwilling to do their best as they feel that they are not going to obtain a mark that is commensurate with their efforts. This may become a vicious circle as their poorer performance serves to reinforce the stereotypes of lower expectations. Fair and non-discriminatory assessment methods and processes are a key area in the design of an inclusive learning environment to enhance the academic success of BME students. Van Dyke, 1998, highlights a range of perceptions among Black and minority ethnic students. For example, that a particular type of written and oral English plays an important part in the marks awarded, and that the criteria being applied to their work are discriminatory. She suggests that good marks in coursework among Black and minority ethnic groups is often masked by poor exam performance, a form of assessment that is biased against those who lack preparation in exam techniques, and she recommends the use of a variety of assessment methods, an approach that is, of course, considered to be good general educational practice. In a continuation of the theme of transforming the curriculum, Warren, 2004, advocates the use of a critical pedagogy, where the teacher welcomes diverse perspectives without spotlighting individuals, and encourages all students to reflect critically on their own cultural values and biases, allowing students to negotiate assessment tasks pertinent to their own cultural backgrounds. Activity. Dear students, may you please group yourself into different groups with adequate emphasis to gender involvement and due attention for involving females to chair groups during the discussion session and present the reports refined. Dear learners, the country constitution has clearly stated the human and democratic right and freedom of Ethiopian ethnicity to respect and protect unconditionally. How do you evaluate the provisional rights of ethnicity reflection in the curriculum guideline and implementation process? Briefly summarize your evaluation and discuss with your classmates. Ethnic and racial diversity is on the rise among children in American classrooms, yet preserves teachers continue to come primarily from white middle-class areas, and tend not to be well prepared for teaching in ethnically and racially diverse settings. Castro, 2010. Research indicates that pre-service teachers can grow in their level of interest in culturally sensitive pedagogy over time. Growell and Silver, 2010, and that more new teachers are interested in matters concerning racial justice in education than in the past. Castro, 2010. However, new education professionals tend to be oversimplistic in their conceptions of diversity, overly reliant on their own cultural lens, and heavily influenced by past experiences. Castro, 2010. Growell and Silver, 2010. Taylor, 2010. Perhaps even more disconcerting is the notion among some pre-service teachers that establishing a diverse educational curriculum is not the responsibility of a teacher, but rather that of a community or a school in general. Silverman, 2010. These observations suggest the presence of a persistent cultural intelligence deficit among new teachers, despite the best efforts made in teacher education programs, TEP, to instill an awareness of multiculturalism and diverse pedagogies. Gender. The concept gender has wider interpretations in our world. What is the difference between gender and sex? Sex refers to the biological difference between men and women, whereas gender refers to the socially constructed differences between men and women. In all societies, women and men play different roles, have different needs, and face different constraints. For example, in some countries child-rearing, food preparation, and household maintenance are demarcated as responsibilities of women, whereas in others not. Gender responsibilities vary in the following aspects: A. Social and economic activities, B. Access to resources, C. Decision-making authority, activity. Dear learners, the dimension of gender is the most important concept to the development and civilized awareness of any society. Hence education should be one major instrument to materialize. How do you describe our curriculum and educational system from gender as multicultural perspective? Social class. In every culture, subgroups may form. Subgroups can differ by any of the components of culture, including ethnicity, language, class, religion, and geography. These subgroups can be very different from each other, even though they share some traits and values. Often members of the dominant society or subgroup of a culture view their culture as correct and all others as incorrect or even inferior. Historically, the mainstream culture in the United States has been Western European, deriving from political, economic, and language systems in Great Britain. Taylor and Whitaker, 2009. The United States also has a history of limited full access to mainstream culture for those members of society who are not racially white or Caucasian. In this chapter, the term culturally diverse students will be used to refer to students who may be distinguished from the mainstream culture by ethnicity, social class, and/or language. Perez, 1998. As such, this term may refer to students who are from racial ethnic minority groups, students whose primary language is not English, and students who are from low-income or poor households. However, it is also important to remember that all students are culturally diverse regardless of their ethnicity, race, or socio-economic status. We limit our definition along lines of ethnicity, social class, and race because of the historic and current marginalization these groups have experienced and how these experiences have resulted in inequitable schooling practices. Often the terms social class and socio-economic status, SES, are used interchangeably and refer to distinctions not only in income but also in property ownership, occupation, education, personal and family life, and education of children. Taylor, 1986. Institutions, including schools, tend to adopt what are typically thought of as middle-class ideologies to guide practice. These ideologies are associated with the quality of life of societies economically and socially privileged. Although these ideologies are not exclusively middle class, they are culturally influenced and may manifest in different ways for families from diverse backgrounds. Activity, based on the above reading on social class are one major form of diversity. What is your experience on the social classes of your students and your previous classes? Religion. In matters of religion, the Ethiopian education policy requires that schools should provide secular education in the country. This appears to be a policy of uniform treatment of religions across the board, with no single religion being part of the school curriculum at the exclusion of others. On the other hand, however, the multicultural values such as respect, tolerance, equality, and conflict resolution and management, which are deemed important in the policy, can contribute to the promotion of coexistence among the followers of different religions in the country. Generally, the education policy of Ethiopia addresses multicultural expectations and directives in education in terms of promoting tolerance, mutual understanding, peaceful conflict resolution and management, equality, justice, liberty, dignity, moral values, democratic culture, and respect for human rights. Activity. What is your opinion on the diversity of religion in our curriculum and educational system? Take one subject textbook and evaluate based on the assumptions given above. Disability. The other important concept that should be considered in multicultural education is disability. This term has many definitions. The following definitions are taken from the Internet. Disability is the condition of being unable to perform as a consequence of physical or mental unfitness. Disability is a physical or mental impairment which has a substantial and long-term adverse effect on a person's ability to carry out day-to-day activities. For example, hearing impairment, visual impairment, mobility impairment, etc. Read the following scenarios, identify possible barriers to learning and suggest possible strategies for support by the school or teacher. Hailey suffered from measles very badly as a small child, which has left him with both hearing and visual impairment. He has had special help through elementary and high school which has enabled him to cope with his disabilities. He cannot read printed materials easily, but he can write and read Braille. Fante is an orphan and has 2 small children of her own. She has worked extremely hard to complete her education, supporting herself by growing and selling vegetables. Getaku has just been diagnosed as HIV positive. He is a friendly, outgoing young man who seems to be coping well. Asta has been on crutches following an accident when she was a small child. She has limited mobility from the waist down and relies on her mother for support. In school, she had supportive friends who looked after her. Fyro has epilepsy. When he reached adolescence, he began to have seizures more frequently. His doctor hopes that he will be better as he becomes more mature and that new medication will help him. Timcat finishes the work before everybody in the class. Her work is always excellent. She says she is bored with the work because it is too easy. Tsiga has language difficulties. She copes very well in her local language and was given language support by a family friend to help her achieve good results in her grade 10 exam. Her Amharic and her English are very limited. Cassie becomes angry very easily and he loses his temper and hits other students in the class when he finds the work difficult. His new maths teacher realizes that he can only count up to 10. Metx was involved in a car accident and is now in a wheelchair. She is good in all her subjects. Tamaram is in grade 7. He is good at mathematics, but he can hardly read the simplest material. Belta finds it difficult to read the board when she is near the back of the class. Her work in all subjects is above average for the group. Solomon works at the same speed as everybody in the group and his written work is good. He never talks to anybody else in the group, he is always on his own. Self-test. A pedagogical sound educational system of a country has to consider the forms and pricing pools of diversified cultural society under its curriculum. Hence, in a group or pair assess our curriculum if it qualifies inclusion of the major forms of diversity with examples. The social construction of identities. Over the long history of our species, human beings have developed complex forms of identity, which makes it possible to interact and live together, says British philosopher Kwame Appiah. Globalization has also seen new forms of differences amongst human beings generated all the time. Much before the 1960s there were many identities that did not exist that we see in society today, such as Scientologists, punks, hip-hop and so forth. These different identities are important forms of cultural differences that have evolved in society during time. These identities also shape the lives of many people around the world. As human beings we develop different forms of social identities that makes it possible to live together. We further construct our identities to suit our ever-changing environments. Our social identities change all the time, but they are not replaced with nothing, they are replaced with changed identities. For the purpose of my essay I would like to introduce to you how social identities are socially constructed and the process through which it occurs. For a better understanding on this topic, I will further explain concepts that are relevant to the construction of identities, and will introduce some key people who are academically valid social science figures in this subject field. By understanding that social identity is constructed through socialization, I will hereby explain what this means. Socialization is a process by which adults or children learn certain types of behavior, rules and values. These behaviors are learned from parents, friends, school and the environments humans engage in, to become functional members of society. These various groups, institutions and individuals can be referred to as the agents of socialization. This learning process starts from childhood and continues to adulthood, and the process is ongoing. Stereotypes and prejudices, racial discrimination and prejudices have been a constant battle our country has been dealing with for many years. Race affects nearly all aspects of life such as education, Perillo, 1994, to workplace interactions, Horton and Thomas, 1995, to family experiences, Taylor, 1994, and, even to how men and women interact, Aldridge 1990. Even now there are still separations between groups of people. Culture shock is very much prevalent when students from all over with different experiences are placed in one general area to live. I have already encountered such shocking comments about race in discussion from other classes. I consider myself to be fairly open-minded and to have generally unprejudiced views of others. It makes me wonder where some of these people I am discussing issues with came from and what experiences and influences cause them to stereotype on other groups of people they have never encountered or know anything about the individuals. Although racism has steadily decreased over the past decade with the interventions of school programs to reduce prejudiced views, subtle racial comments and differences still occur all around us. What early influences establish prejudiced views and stereotyping among children? When humans are young we do not even think to judge one another based on the color of our skin or any other difference for that matter. We all have the similar attributes such as arms, legs, eyes or a nose which lets us know we are all alike. As we get older our perceptions of each other change and we form separate categories for some people. This shows these views must come from somewhere other than biologically what we are born with. This constant struggle make an equal and just world is still continuing to cause problems with racial issues. Such attempted solutions as affirmative action, which instills racial quotas in education and work environments, are still statements of separation and differences among people. If we as a society working together to establish equality could understand where in our early lives we distinguish differences and why we do, we would be better, drastically subside the unfair treatment of others and abolish attitudes of judgment. Evolution of Prejudice, Bergen, 2001, tried to answer the question in how prejudices among children begin and what causes these learned prejudices. He also describes the development of prejudice and the role of us versus them instead of the socially moral me versus you. The methods used were observations of peer groups of early-aged children. They observed how children reacted to situations of identification while in the preschool setting. They also observed different children in the family primary group setting through parent modeling. The result of these observations describes children's stages of prejudice. The environment at home develops biases through modeling of parental actions and words spoken. A child already forms the idea of group when they are born into the family. Modeling exerts more powerful effects on children below ages 7 to 8. At 2 years of age, children can separate differences among gender, black and white, and can identify which identity they have. Prejudice is learned from family, peers and social environment. It is not instinctive. Prejudice is a series of stages such as fear of strangers creating an outgroup or them, gender and racial awareness separating differences, identification with a group as us versus them, identify with parents as what satisfies parents, rejection of outsiders, selective rejection as part of particular groups so they are rejected, point of view on the world questioning morals, and choice to be or not to be prejudice and accept the roles. Bergen 2001. Environment and family. One of the earliest stages of children's interaction through environment and family directly influence their interactions and experiences daily with society. Children's socialization occurs through family and environment contributions to instill important aspects of a child's early interaction with others. Adaptive cultures surrounding a child can define goals, values, and attitudes which are combined with history and current demands in order to construct a child's own beliefs during this socialization process. Families along with environment then begin to work together to establish a child's experiences through interaction. The processes of racism and prejudice directly affect a child's experiences. Therefore, a child's socialization development of negative views is established by these influential contributions from family and environment together. Cole, 2001. Cultural influences from families, a study examining the effects of interactions between children and their parents and significant others observed the parental influence of beliefs and values of different families and the differences that affect a child's socialization experience. The researchers sought to understand how and under what conditions socialization occurs. Some of the findings drawn from this article were that parent expectations and encouragement strongly influence a child's academic and social challenges. These cultural differences in families have strong effects on how children perform socially and academically. Coates and Agena 1999. Personal names encourage racial stereotypes. In addition to other countries, it is important to look at other perspectives of derived stereotypes. Children age 4 and 5 were studied to determine if stereotypes and prejudiced views had developed under the basis of personal names. Personal names might encourage children in stereotyping race through personal names. Daniel and Daniel 1998. Education to change unawareness of prejudice. Another study attempted to determine what actions educators need to take in order to ensure an unbiased and an indiscriminate environment for children. The researcher also tried to find out what is necessary to suppress prejudices that children have already developed from home and other group environments outside the classroom. They interviewed preschool-aged children and their views on certain topics such as people, and what is right and what is wrong. The children gave opinionated answers based on what they have learned from their life up until now. Some children were observed from a prejudiced setting and some from a learned unprejudiced setting. The results of the study described the biased gender remarks from unaware prejudiced children, such as girls shouldn't do that based on standards set by family and peers about female and male gender roles. Also, children considered others not like them to be wrong or bad. The children observed through learned unprejudiced environment could accept people for who they were and not what they were supposed to be, such as a girl drew herself as a surgeon but wearing a pink dress and a crown, showing an unbiased stereotypical view of a surgeon. These results showed that educators need to involve the family in all aspects of anti-prejudiced education. Educators also need to incorporate new techniques to stimulate knowledge of cultural differences, balance students' values outside their comfort area, and develop self-awareness in a proper moral society. Sparks, 1993. Programs reducing prejudice in schools. Studies have shown that education plays an important role in a child's construction of prejudiced views. Many researchers still hold to the theory that prejudice is learned from parents and peers, while others suggest influences of people whom children seek approval from contribute to a child's adopted stereotypical attitudes. Stephan, 1999. These understandings are necessary if classroom programs are going to attempt to change and send positive messages of respect of all people. 3 studies were conducted. The first evaluated a teacher's encouragement of students to pay attention to individualized information about members of groups rather than racial qualities. The program lowered prejudice in high prejudice students, but already low prejudice students stayed at about the same level. The second study aimed at answering the question if talking about race leads to prejudice or tolerance and peers to influence each other. Each low prejudice student was paired with a high prejudice student. Also, the low students were not influenced by the high students. As the discussion progressed, the 2 extreme students began to have similar comments. The third study focused on how students would react to others who are not their friends. These studies all focused on interventions to reduce prejudice and to see what direction society needs to take in order to increase respect and tolerance among all people. Abad and Fennick, 1999. Ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism is the tendency to believe that one's ethnic or cultural group is centrally important, and that all other groups are measured in relation to one's own. The ethnocentric individual will judge other groups relative to his or her own particular ethnic group or culture, especially with concern to language, behavior, customs, and religion. These ethnic distinctions and subdivisions serve to define each ethnicity's unique cultural identity. Ethnocentrism is a commonly used word in circles where ethnicity, interethnic relations, and similar social issues are of concern. The usual definition of the term is thinking one's own group's ways are superior to others, or judging other groups as inferior to one's own. Ethnic refers to cultural heritage, and centrism refers to the central starting point. So ethnocentrism basically refers to judging other groups from our own cultural point of view. But even this does not address the underlying issue of why people do this. Most people, thinking of the shallow definition, believe that they are not ethnocentric, but are rather open-minded and tolerant. However, as explained below, everyone is ethnocentric, and there is no way not to be ethnocentric. It cannot be avoided, nor can it be willed away by a positive or well-meaning attitude. To address the deeper issues involved in ethnocentrism calls for a more explicit definition. In this sense, ethnocentrism can be defined as making false assumptions about others' ways based on our own limited experience. The key word is assumptions, because we are not even aware that we are being ethnocentric. We don't understand that we don't understand. One example of ethnocentrism is seen in the above comments on the Inuit snowshoe race. I assumed that I had lost the race, but it turns out the Inuit saw the same situation very differently than I did. Discrimination in schools. Discrimination occurs when someone is treated unfairly or badly in certain respects. Not all discrimination is against the law, even if it is unfair. Discrimination happens because people have stereotypical or prejudiced ideas or beliefs about other people because they happen to belong to a particular group of people or because they have certain personal characteristics or attributes. This kind of direct discrimination is often the result of failing to treat each person as an individual regardless of their sex, age, race, etc. Discrimination can also happen in a more indirect way. In some cases, treating everybody the same can be unfair because it disadvantages a whole group of people. For example, requiring all enrollment applicants for a hospitality course to meet minimum height requirements may disadvantage women or people of particular ethnic origin. Unless such a rule is necessary or reasonable in all the relevant circumstances, it will be indirect discrimination and against the law. Indirect discrimination is not usually intentional but is often the result of forgetting to think about the impact of rules and requirements on different people. Direct discrimination. This occurs when one person treats another person less favorably than they would another because of a protected characteristic. Indirect discrimination. Indirect discrimination occurs when a provision, criterion or practice appears neutral, but its impact particularly disadvantages people with a protected characteristic, unless this can be justified as a proportionate means of achieving a legitimate aim. Harassment. The Equality Act outlines 3 types of harassment: unwanted conduct that has the purpose or effect of creating an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating or offensive environment for the complainant, or violating the complainant's dignity. This applies to all the protected characteristics apart from pregnancy and maternity, and marriage and civil partnership. Unwanted conduct of a sexual nature. Sexual harassment, treating a person less favorably than another person because they have either submitted to, or did not submit to, sexual harassment or harassment related to sex or gender reassignment. The perceptions of the recipient are very important, and harassment may be deemed to have occurred even if the intention was not present, but the recipient felt that they were being harassed. Strategies for tackling racism, sexism and other problems. Classroom application activities. 1. Define and discuss the differences between the following terms: culture, race, ethnicity, and language. 2. List and discuss 2 factors that may be relevant to the academic achievement of culturally and linguistically diverse students. 3. Discuss how socio-economic status is related to the academic achievement of culturally and linguistically diverse students. The students will engage in a discussion about their personal connection to their own culture and how certain cultural symbols may or may not be related to their concepts of identity. The harm of prejudicial attitudes is not always explicit. Steele, 1997, describes a phenomenon termed stereotype threat whereby students perceive prejudicial attitudes related to their expected performance in a school subject, and as a result, their performance declines in the subject. For example, when female students perceived prejudicial attitudes in the area of mathematics, their performance in mathematics suffered. Because stereotype threat is, as Steele describes it, in the air, the inequity of student learning and assessment is concealed, and norms supporting prejudicial attitudes are reinforced. When students experience prejudice in school, they sometimes disengage from school because they disassociate the setting of school from their overarching identities. This is a way to disassociate self-identity with tasks and settings that are prejudicial. This is dire because disassociation with school often leads to school failure. In general, Stereotypes and prejudices led to discrimination and oppression of individuals and groups, and it is for this reason that we need to raise consciousness and encourage action on this issue. Teachers themselves must be particularly aware of any discriminatory practices or behaviors that they may be unconsciously role modeling to their students. To enable students to come closer to the desired goal of achieving cultural respect and solidarity, one of the first things students need to do is to re-examine themselves and become more keenly aware of their own prejudices and the stereotypes that they hold. Activity: how can prejudice be reduced in schools? What could be the roles of school teachers, principals, and supervisors in reducing prejudice in schools? Prejudice reduction is a necessary component of multicultural education. Educators are in unique positions to improve intergroup relations inside and outside of school because public schools offer two resources: differences and common goals. It is within this social milieu that multicultural education and prejudice reduction can transpire. When students attempt to express differences and reach cooperative goals, for example, solve a science problem or deliberate socially just rules in their school, they can gain perspective consciousness of their classmates and others. In other words, students can become aware that there are multiple perspectives concerning social conditions or the best course of action for their community. Multicultural education helps students see these multiple perspectives with an eye toward ending social oppression. It seeks to help students develop positive and democratic racial attitudes. It also helps students to understand how ethnic identity is influenced by the context of schooling and the attitudes and beliefs of dominant social groups. The theory developed by Gordon Allport, 1954, has significantly influenced research and theory in intergroup relations. He hypothesized that prejudice can be reduced by interracial contact if the contact situations have these characteristics. 1. They are cooperative rather than competitive. 2. The individual's experience equals status. And 3. The contact is sanctioned by authorities such as parents, principals and teachers. Davidio al. 2004, describe prejudicial attitudes as having cognitive, affective, and behavioral components. Prejudice reduction is possible when multicultural education targets each of these components, and as a result, negative intergroup prejudices are transformed into positive intergroup relationships. Successful multicultural education addresses each of these components in the prejudice reduction process. First, the cognitive component of prejudice encompasses the negative thoughts or beliefs students have concerning an individual or group. School sites are ideal social milieus for examining prejudicial knowledge when such examinations are sanctioned by educators. Second, an affective component of prejudice entails negative student feelings about a target person or group. Under optimal conditions of intergroup contact in a multicultural curriculum, students are able to build positive affective ties with peers by placing value upon these relationships. Third, a behavioral component of prejudice influences students' prejudicial attitudes when they consider past or future experiences with a target person or group. Students can examine past experiences with intergroup contacts and role-play future contacts with positive behavioral outcomes. Prejudice reduction in multicultural education aims at creating learning environments where the societal prejudices that fuel hegemony are not reproduced in classrooms. Gerards, 2006. Report for HEFCE on barriers to participation in higher education notes that students from non-traditional backgrounds tend to be viewed as a problem because of the assumptions we make about the capabilities of different groups. To many students, academia is a strange culture to which they need to adjust if they are to be able to perform well in assessment, and Gerard al. 2006. Suggests that students from diverse educational backgrounds need to learn the rules of the game in order to do well in assessment at university. As Allen, 1998, and others have suggested, promoting equality and diversity within the curriculum is not just a matter of equal access to existing educational power structures, but of ultimately finding ways of transforming them. Summary: our world is remarkably diverse, and this diversity has implications in work, community, and educational contexts. Issues of diversity, difference, and disability can be quite complex and challenging for culturally and linguistically diverse (CLD) students and their classroom teachers. The added complexity of diversity in today's schools can make the pressure of delivering an excellent education to students feel overwhelming and arduous for some teachers. Although teaching can be difficult and challenging, it is imperative that teachers find ways to bring wonder, joy, and passion into the classroom. By taking time to connect with and learn about students, teachers have an opportunity to stay connected with the rewards of teaching. These rewards are reciprocal. When the teacher is having fun and enjoying teaching, the students will have fun and enjoy learning.